Claire Benton thought she had found safety in the arms of her husband, Ryan Cross, until a forgotten DNA test revealed he was the masked rapist who had shattered her life 14 years earlier. Claire Benton had always believed she'd escaped the worst parts of her life. Now 33, she worked as a registered nurse at a busy trauma unit in Austin, Texas. She was known for her calm under pressure, her compassion, and her dedication to her patients. Her co-workers admired her, and her friends envied her seemingly perfect life. After years of dating failures, she had finally met someone who treated her with kindness and stability. His name was Ryan Cross, a quiet, intelligent software developer who preferred home-cooked dinners to loud bars and long drives through hill country over crowded parties. They met at a hospital fundraiser 2 years earlier. Ryan had attended as a guest of a board member, and their brief conversation over the punch table turned into dinner plans, then weekend trips, and eventually, a wedding. Claire often told friends she felt safe with Ryan, and that meant everything to her. He was dependable, soft-spoken, and never raised his voice. He knew when to give her space and when to lean in. When they married at a small ceremony in a botanical garden, Claire believed she had finally healed from the trauma she rarely spoke about. That trauma came from something that happened when she was just 19, an experience that changed her forever. During her first semester of nursing school in Houston, she had been violently raped by a masked intruder in a stairwell near her dormitory. She was walking back from a late-night study session when she was attacked. The man wore gloves, left no fingerprints, and vanished into the darkness like smoke. Claire was hospitalized for her injuries and underwent a rape kit examination, but the police were never able to identify the perpetrator. With no DNA matches and no leads, the case went cold within months. Though she tried to move on, something inside her had broken that night. She transferred to a different university, cut off old friends, and spent years in therapy trying to rebuild herself. She locked the memory away in a corner of her mind and refused to let it control her. By the time she met Ryan, it had been over a decade. The nightmares had stopped. The flashbacks were rare. For the first time, she felt in control of her future. But trauma has a strange way of hiding in the cracks. It doesn't disappear. It waits, sometimes for years, until something cracks the seal and releases it all over again. That crack came from something as harmless as a gift. During a Black Friday sale, Ryan bought them both DNA kits to trace their family heritage. Claire laughed at the idea, thinking it was silly, but she went along with it anyway. A few weeks later, her results arrived. Most of it was unremarkable. Percentages, maps, distant cousins. Then something strange appeared. A notification from a genealogy database offering crime victim services. Her data had matched a previously unlinked profile in a national criminal DNA database. She didn't understand what it meant at first, but when she opened the message and saw the case number, her world stopped. It was her own rape case from 2009. And the match wasn't to a random cousin or distant relative. It was a direct hit. The DNA matched someone named Ryan Cross, her husband. Claire stared at the screen, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. Her hands trembled as she refreshed the page, hoping that some sort of glitch had occurred. But the result didn't change. The DNA submitted under her name had matched a profile in a federal criminal database. It wasn't a weak connection or a distant relative. It was a full genetic match, indicating that her husband, Ryan Cross, was the source of the male DNA collected during her rape examination in 2009. The very same DNA that had sat in cold storage for over a decade without ever yielding a suspect. Until now. She couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe properly. Every part of her body felt paralyzed by disbelief. Her mind fought the conclusion, throwing every possible excuse at it. Maybe there was an error at the lab. Maybe Ryan had a twin he never mentioned. Maybe someone had stolen his DNA. She tried to tell herself anything that didn't involve the horrifying possibility that the man she had married, loved, and trusted with her life was the same person who had violently stolen her sense of safety all those years ago. For hours, Claire scoured the website, reading every word of the report. She even looked up scientific papers to understand how accurate the testing could be. There was no doubt. The probability of error was less than 1 in 1 billion. The DNA found during her rape kit examination had been entered into CODIS, the combined DNA index system, but had never matched anyone in the system. Ryan, it seemed, had never been arrested for anything serious that required him to submit a sample. Until now. By voluntarily submitting the DNA test, he'd unknowingly linked himself to a crime he thought was long buried. Claire contacted the company directly and asked for an anonymous retest, submitting a second sample under a different name. She paid extra for expedited processing. The results came back 2 weeks later. Same match. Same result. Ryan Cross was genetically identical to the man who had raped her in 2009. Still refusing to believe what her own eyes were telling her, Claire started pulling together documents, yearbooks, address histories, old court records. She dug into his background using every public database available. But the deeper she searched, the more disturbing the picture became. She discovered that Ryan Cross hadn't always been Ryan Cross. His birth name was Ethan James Crowley. He had legally changed it in 2015 after a DUI charge in a different state, one that had been mysteriously sealed. She looked through old photos he'd shared, certificates, degrees. Much of it was real, but some things were off, like the college transfer dates, the lack of consistent employment history before 2016, and the vague answers he gave about his family. It became increasingly clear that the man she had married had deliberately crafted a false version of himself. She had never questioned it. Why would she? He'd seemed like the kind of man who didn't like talking about the past. She understood that. She had a past, too. Now, that same past had looped back like a noose tightening around her neck. Claire began comparing timelines, matching her own memories with what little she knew of his early life. The realization crept in slowly, and then struck her like a lightning bolt. Ryan had been in Houston in 2009. He had been enrolled in a university just 10 miles from her dorm. He had access. He had opportunity. And most horrifying of all, he had always known who she was. In the days that followed, Claire's life unraveled in quiet chaos. Outwardly, nothing changed. She still went to work, smiled at her patients, and came home to the man she now feared more than anything. But inside, a storm churned. Every glance, every hug, every shared meal with Ryan became unbearable. She knew who he was now, or rather, who he had been all along. And the cruelest truth of all was that he knew it too. He had known it from the start. She didn't stumble into his life by accident. He had placed himself in hers with precision. She began to notice details she had ignored before. The way he had remembered small things about her early college years that she never told him. How he never asked questions about the attack she once vaguely mentioned during a vulnerable moment, almost like he already knew the story. How he once said, "Everything that happened to you led you to me," a phrase that now rang like a twisted confession. Still, she needed proof. Her mind teetered between panic and paranoia. If she went to the police now, she needed more than a DNA match and a changed name. She needed to know everything. So she quietly began investigating. she installed a hidden camera in the corner of his home office. She copied his hard drive late at night when he was asleep. She looked through his drawers, finding a second phone tucked behind old cables and outdated tech. That phone opened a darker world. Dozens of encrypted messages, usernames that led nowhere, photos of her, taken years before they'd supposedly met. Claire found a blurry image of herself outside her Houston dorm, dated just 2 weeks before the attack. Another showed her in the student cafeteria. There were even candid shots of her walking to class. It wasn't just a coincidence. He had stalked her. He had chosen her. She took screenshots of everything, backed up files onto a flash drive, and stored them in a safe deposit box under a false name. She told no one, not even her closest friend or her therapist. If Ryan found out what she knew, she didn't know what he would do. The man who lived in her home was not her husband. He was a stranger who had studied her for years, violated her body, and then infiltrated her life wearing a mask of love. Claire tracked down his original college records, piecing together his trail. At the time of her rape, he had been enrolled under his birth name, Ethan Crowley, at a nearby technical college. He dropped out 3 months after the assault. There was also a 2011 complaint filed by a woman at a different campus, accusing him of stalking, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. A pattern was forming, one that had been hiding in plain sight. One afternoon, while he was out for a jog, she opened the locked drawer in his desk using a screwdriver. Inside was a manila folder labeled simply C. It was filled with printed photos, notes, timelines, and an old newspaper clipping about the 2009 stairwell rape. Her rape. The truth was no longer a theory. He hadn't just married her. He had hunted her, built a life with her. And for 2 years, he had lain beside her every night, knowing she was the same woman he had once left bleeding in the dark. Claire didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time after discovering the folder. Her hands shook even when she wasn't holding anything. Her heart raced in moments of silence. Every sound in the house became suspicious. Every creak in the floorboards a potential threat. The man she had loved, married, and built a life with had been watching her, planning around her, long before she ever knew his name. Now, she realized, she was living in a carefully designed trap. And Ryan, Ethan, was beginning to suspect that something had changed. At first, it was subtle. He started asking odd questions. If she'd spoken to anyone from her past, if she still kept her old journals, if she ever thought about what happened to her back then. He brought it up casually, with the tone of someone pretending to be interested in comforting her. But Claire could hear the edges of control beneath his voice. He was testing her, probing for cracks. She stopped using the internet at home. She visited libraries and used burner phones to reach out. First, she called a criminal defense attorney and explained the situation. Then she contacted a retired detective, Detective Harlan Briggs, who had worked on her original rape case before it went cold. At first, he was skeptical. But when she sent him a copy of the DNA results and documentation of Ryan's name change, he went silent. After a long pause, he told her that if everything she claimed could be verified, she might be sitting on a case unlike any he'd ever seen. Claire provided him with everything she had: photos, files, the contents of the hidden phone, the tracking notes she'd found. They started to build a timeline, a dark, detailed roadmap of stalking, manipulation, and premeditated deception. But Detective Briggs warned her of the risks. This was not a typical case. No forced entry, no masked figure caught in the act. The marriage, the cohabitation, the trust, those would complicate how a court viewed her story. And if Ryan caught on before the arrest was made, things could escalate fast. The warning came just in time. Claire noticed Ryan becoming more withdrawn. He stopped going to work and began spending long hours locked in his home office. His eyes followed her with a strange intensity now. There was no more softness in his gaze, just calculation. One night, after pretending to fall asleep, she crept downstairs and checked the office camera. The footage showed Ryan burning documents, pages from journals, old photographs, even his birth certificate. The next morning, Claire packed a small bag, slipped out the back door, and disappeared. She went directly to a women's shelter and entered protective custody under a temporary name change. With help from her attorney and the detective, she filed for a restraining order and submitted formal charges to the district attorney's office. An arrest warrant was drafted. But when law enforcement arrived at the house 2 days later, Ryan was gone. His car was missing. His phone had been turned off. All that remained was an empty office, a half-packed suitcase, and a shattered picture frame of their wedding day on the floor. He had vanished. Just like he had once disappeared from her life in 2009, only this time he had left as her husband. And Claire knew, with every fiber of her being, that if he had run, it wasn't to escape justice. It was to finish what he started. Ryan's disappearance triggered a statewide manhunt. His face was plastered across news broadcasts and social media, though under the name he was most recently known by, Ryan Cross. Most people still didn't know he had once been Ethan Crowley, or that he was connected to a cold case sexual assault from over a decade earlier. Authorities released minimal details, citing the sensitivity of the investigation. But behind the scenes, law enforcement was scrambling. They weren't just looking for a missing man. They were trying to track down a predator who had evaded justice for years and was now on the run with everything to lose. For Claire, those days were a blur of fear and numbness. She remained in hiding, her location known only to a handful of officials and the retired detective who had helped build her case. She barely slept. Her every thought was consumed by one chilling possibility, that Ryan wasn't running to get away. He might be running to get to her. The idea that he could be out there, watching, waiting for the right moment, kept her locked inside a reinforced safe house, blinds drawn, phone off. Then, almost 2 weeks after his disappearance, his abandoned car was found deep in the Texas Hill Country, wedged into a dirt path surrounded by mesquite trees. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside was a note, scribbled on the back of an old receipt. "You were never supposed to know." The message sent a wave of nausea through Claire. The handwriting was unmistakably his. That single sentence confirmed what she had feared all along. He had built everything on a lie. And once the illusion broke, he couldn't bear to let her exist with the truth. The discovery led search teams to widen their net, scouring nearby trails, cabins, and remote lodges. Helicopters flew overhead. Dogs combed the forest floor. But there was no sign of him for 5 more days. Eventually, authorities found a secluded cabin more than 50 miles west of Austin, nestled among thick brush. It belonged to a distant relative of Ryan's, someone who hadn't seen him in years and didn't know he was a fugitive. Inside, law enforcement found the air stale and still. Ryan's body lay slumped in a corner, a half-empty bottle of pills beside him, and a laptop still open on a table. He had died by overdose. Next to him, in a cardboard box, were photographs from their wedding, printouts of Claire's old social media posts, and shockingly, a torn copy of the police report filed after her 2009 assault. It was all there, details of the attack, medical notes, the clothing she had worn. He had kept it, studied it, obsessively. There was also a hard drive, later revealed to contain video footage he had captured without her knowledge, some dating back years before their first meeting. Investigators concluded that Ryan had been stalking Claire for over a decade, orchestrating their eventual meeting, grooming her emotionally, and manipulating every step of their relationship. He hadn't just married her. He had constructed a life designed to keep her close, to control her, to ensure that his secret would never be discovered. Claire never returned to her former life. She changed her name, moved across the country, and left nursing behind. But the story followed her. Her case became one of the most disturbing examples of long-term predatory behavior in modern history. And though the man who raped her was dead, the truth he buried had finally come to light.